Well, good afternoon if you're watching this live. This is something over a day late. It is 11s. I am Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. I had all sorts of trouble trying to get the show to stream properly on Sunday. So I have hopefully fixed some problems by using some different streaming software. And so today's show is technically 319, which was supposed to go out on Sunday, the 26th of March, and it's actually Monday, the 27th, and it's the afternoon. So I'll give you a quick rundown of what we're going to talk about. Third anniversary of COVID and the 11s, the National Motorcycle Council engaging with Hackney Council over the powered two-wheeler parking charges there. Evidence of some pushback on Bali's proposed tourist bike hire ban. And in Hawaii, bikes could be allowed to run red lights in certain circumstances. We'll look at a 7-year warranty from the Chinese manufacturer or importer Sinnis, and we'll ask if adjustable wrenches are useful for bikers. And then today's discussion point, I was going to look at my visit to the Moto Cap laboratory at Deakin University in Geelong in Australia, but I'm actually going to hold that one over as it was a fairly long piece. And I'll talk instead briefly about how EU countries are now starting to challenge the EU's proposed cut-off dates for ICE vehicles. So hopefully this is going out smoothly, and we'll be back with the standard timings on Wednesday. But so just again, apologies for all those who looked in yesterday at 11. As I said, gremlins struck, partly operator error in the first instance, but after that, I couldn't get a stable connection and it just wouldn't go out. So I'm using a different streaming service this afternoon to repeat the show. All right, okay, so oh, we've got Kevin watching. Hello, Kevin. I didn't expect you to find this as quickly as that. Well done. Right, well, it's hard to believe that last week actually marked the beginning of the third anniversary of the first COVID lockdown, and that means, of course, it's the third anniversary of 11s too. The first 11s show actually went out on the 26th, I think it was. I've lost the date now. The 25th of March back in 2020. So fairly astonishing that it's all that long ago. I've got a little screenshot here of the notice I put up. Now I started the live webcast partly as a means to keep personally busy when I was suddenly left with no work, but also something to offer everybody else who was stuck at home. So what's changed? Well, hopefully it's got slightly more professional. I do have a green screen now, which means I can use a background rather than a couple of banners hung up on an old projector screen, which is what he started off with. The PEC uplinks now Ethernet rather than Wi-Fi, and hopefully my spelling is a bit better. If you read the screenshot, which was supposed to be on screen, there it is, then you'll notice that there is in fact a rather ghastly spelling mistake right up in the top left hand corner, so hopefully I've got that one right. I was going to say that the software I'd used is been upgraded too, but as I say, I've had problems with that very same software as of yesterday. So 11s is still going out live on Facebook. It's also live streamed now over on YouTube, where it's actually much easier to catch up with the old shows than on Facebook. And that's useful if, of course, you're in a different time zone or you've simply missed the live stream. You may not know, however, that I also post the audio only as a podcast on Spotify. The link to that, let's see if I can put that up in this particular software. Yes, I can. There it goes. So there we are. That's where the podcast is if you want to just listen to the audio. Obviously, you don't get the pictures with the audio only. Did I think I'd still be doing this after all these months? Well, I quite honestly, no, I didn't. The show is pretty time consuming to create. It generally takes, for a 40-minute show, about 3 to 4 hours to actually prepare it, then another hour or so, which is the live delivery, and then sort of the time it takes at the end of that show just to upload it to the various other places it goes. So that is, of course, one reason then the the site ask for some support, you'll do invite you at least to consider offering me some help over on my coffee page. But of course, if you do buy me a cup, you also get access to the huge archive of better bike articles. And Kevin is regular over there. Thank you, Kevin, for that. Much appreciated. So why do I still do it? Well, I do enjoy it. It's a different medium from simply writing or even just producing something like my 60-second safety videos. It also gives me a chance to meet and greet the regulars who look in, and I do enjoy the interaction too. And of course, it does give me a chance to comment on certain items with my personal views too. So 11s isn't going away anytime soon. Kevin says my spelling is better than his typing. Well, I'm not sure about that. Actually, it was a ghastly mistake that I made on the very first show. Anyway, never mind. So what else to talk about? Well, the row with Hackney Council over charges for motorcycle parking is rumbling on. And the body itself holds a meeting tonight to consider those revised charges. So that is tonight, Monday, 27th of March. Now, what we have to show you here is a photograph of some motorbikes. If just struggling with the different setup of the this program I'm using, which is not the normal one. Now, you'll recall that Hackney wanted to introduce huge charges for using motorcycle parking bays, or even residence parking for that matter, of around £60 a day for the public access parking bays. That's £14,000 a year. Now, that was clearly unsustainable for the many low-paid residents and workers, such as nursing staff, who actually rely on scooters to get to their place of work. So Hackney Council claimed to be working with motorcycle businesses across the borough to ensure these changes have minimal impact. That's what they stated. But George Dennison, who's the owner of Moto Den, he commented on the impact to his business, and he said, "This is completely untrue. I've had no direct contact with anyone at Hackney Council about motorcycle parking charges. I'd like to know which motorcycle businesses they did consult, as they've come nowhere near me." Now, after protests all through the autumn and winter from local bikers, mobilised by the Save London motorcycling group, representatives were invited to appear at a meeting. And the group says that the council there promised that they would work with them to make changes to the charges. And they were given assurance, they say, that they would see these changes before the council put them to the vote. But it appears that the new charges have been determined without consultation, and they were going to go to the council meeting without contacting the group again. Now, the group says that the council's made no changes to the exorbitant charges for residents or for business permits for parking. And while they say that the charge for the motorcycle bays has dropped to £10 a day, they point out that this still means that a regular commuter would have to spend £2,300 a year just to park in Hackney. And it seems they also plan that all-day parking will only be available in Shoreditch and Hoxton, and elsewhere riders would have a limited time in parking bays. So theoretically, I suppose they'd have to move the bikes. Don't know how you get around that one. Now, the group are turning up to the cabinet meeting, which is, as I say, tonight, Monday, March 27th, to continue their protest. And if you can support them, I know that you haven't got much time left, but they ask you that you turn up outside the council building at 5:30 tonight. That's East E8 1EA is the postcode. Now, meanwhile, the National Motorcyclist Council has become involved in the row. The NMC Executive Director, Craig Kerry-Clinch, he said, "We're alarmed by the apparent bad faith demonstrated by Hackney Council officers on this issue and urge Cabinet to reject the report and instruct officers to engage motorcycling organisations in a meaningful way to develop sensible and fair proposals for motorcycle parking policy." And I'd say it's necessary, and I honestly think it's about time the NMC got involved, actually, because even if you see this, and I know many people do, as a London issue, what happens in London nearly always gets transported out to the cities and towns, and the switch away from coin-operated machines to parking apps on the phone means that it's now entirely feasible to charge bikes, because all you have to do is check the registration number, whereas before it was obviously difficult to put a paper ticket on your bike, and not have it nicked by someone to pop in their car. So if Hackney are able to force through these enormous charges, I would expect other councils to start looking at your local bike parking too. So I do think it's important that motorcyclists do understand the problem here and actually support the group in London. Right, now, don't forget this show does normally go out live on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. The reason we're broadcasting live on Monday afternoon is that I had technical hitches, but expect me to revert to the usual time. Now, last Sunday I mentioned that Bali's Governor Wayan Costa had announced that he's looking at plans to ban tourists from riding mopeds and motorcycles in the Indonesian province of Bali, saying that they are disorderly and the riders misbehave. Now, the latest update is if the ban does go into operation, it could actually involve revoking the visas of tourists caught illegally riding these motorbikes. He's apparently approached the Justice Ministry to see if this would be workable. Now, not surprisingly, the news of this proposed ban hasn't gone down well with tourists. One wrote on Twitter, quote, "I visit Bali every year, but if the scooters are banned, I will not be coming back for sure." Others suggested that the locals are the problem, with not many wearing helmets. And even less surprisingly, that particular comment created another backlash from the locals. One responded that tourists on motorcycles are a menace on the roads, especially Western tourists who lack nuances, alertness, and awareness of driving and traversing the congested roads. Well, now, of course, not all locals would support the ban. One motorbike rental business owner told a local media outlet that the proposal would hurt rental businesses whilst forcing foreign tourists to rent cars, which he pointed out would, of course, cause even more congestion. But the big step really would be to enforce the rules requiring an appropriate license. Now, I think I mentioned on a previous show that someone I knew fell off, needed skin grafts. Now, against all the advice that she had received before setting off to Bali, she decided to rent the scoot and promptly managed to crash it. But she didn't actually have a two-wheeler license at all. Now, when I went off to the Cook Islands for a visit on the way back from New Zealand in 2019, as soon as I landed in Rarotonga, my first stop after getting off the plane was to the police station to get a Cook Islands driving license. I was actually looking forward to taking their motorcycle test, actually, but it seems that they'd recently changed the rules to waive that requirement for certain visitors from countries like the UK. So after checking that I did actually have a UK license for a motorcycle, I got issued the little paper license you see there, and with that in hand I was able to trot almost the next door and pick up the 125 scooter that I rode for the rest of the holiday. So it's not impossible to prevent unqualified riders from jumping on bikes they can't ride. Now, of course, it's not just tourists who are the problem. I've no doubt there are equally incompetent locals trying to learn to ride out there and gain experience. And frankly, it's the sort of lack of training that does account for the truly awful accident stats in countries like Indonesia and Thailand too. But the difference is that they get to use those bikes on a day-by-day basis in that traffic because they have to. So once they've gone through the learning period, actually, I don't think their accident risk is too high. And there have been some studies which suggest, in fact, in emergencies, they do a little bit better than trained riders, which is interesting. So, right. Okay, normally at this point I would make various announcements, but I haven't got all those announcements set up today. So I will just remind you again that we normally would go out at 11 on Sundays and Wednesdays, but we're going out on Monday today because technical gremlins got in the works for yesterday's show. So, okay. Now, I did mention Hawaii as a news story and the fact that they may be allowing motorcycles to to run red lights in certain circumstances. Now, a little backstory to this. Now, years ago, after late nights at the office, I had to cross a junction on a major road with a set of traffic lights. And what I found was that the bike that I was riding resolutely refused to trigger the induction loops under the surface, and that's what you can see, the markings here where there's a groove is cut in the tarmac, the induction loop is laid in the groove, then it's refilled with bitumen to seal it. the bike actually refused to trigger those induction loops. So even if a car pulled up behind me, I was stopped on the loop and not the car. So I wasn't too happy, of course, about running the red light on a regular basis when they simply wouldn't change. So either I'd pull over and generally wait for a car to pass me, that would trigger the lights and I'd follow the car through. But that could end up being several minutes, as far as 5 or 6 minutes sometimes late at night. So more usually what I did was, once I realised that problem was an issue, I took a different route home. Now, in the UK, there is actually a provision that allows a driver to proceed with caution if they believe lights are faulty, but there's no actual law that says you can do that. So the problem basically is if you happen to cross a red light like that and the PC plod on the other side happens to think you're taking the mickey, you could still get done for running the red and you'd have to argue it out in court. And that usually doesn't go down well when it's a motorcyclist, is my experience from some of my friends who tried to defend themselves against charges. Now, in the US, in Illinois, for example, in state law, it says that if a red light fails to turn green after 120 seconds, a motorcycle rider may proceed through the intersection after yielding the right of way to oncoming traffic. So that's actually down in the statutes. And there's a similar bill going through the legislature in legislature. Anyway, the official state organization in Hawaii that would introduce a similar measure if the traffic signal is controlled by a vehicle detection device that is inoperative due to the size or composition of the bicycle, motorcycle, or moped, then basically you can ride through it after double checking, but only between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. Now, Hawaii's police department are actually against the move, and they publicly said there's got to be a better way than telling them just to go ahead and run the red light. By telling them to run the red light, we've given them a green light to get killed. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, really. I don't think the majority of riders would actually use this provision lightly. I'm sure the vast majority would look carefully both ways. And frankly, those tempted to run the red light without due care are likely to do so, regardless of whether there's a provision that actually allows them to do it at certain times. So, right, okay, moving on. Next story then. I noticed that Sinnis motorcycles have actually launched a 7-year unlimited mileage warranty in the UK. And they say, we believe that motorcycle riding is more than just a hobby, it's a way of life. That's Drew Andrew, their brand manager. And he says, we want to provide our customers with the best possible experience on the road, and the 7-year warranty is a major step forward. Riders can explore the world with confidence, knowing that they have the support and protection they need to get the most out of their motorcycles. MCN promptly said that the 7-year warranty is impressive, more than 3 times longer than the standard 2-year warranty you find on most other motorcycles. Now, the deal is said to cover time and labour charges at any authorised workshop. What's not clear is whether spare parts are inclusive for the entire 7-year period. Now, my old courier bikes used to clock up anything from 25 to 50,000 miles a year, with me generally running them into the ground in rather less than 7 years. When I was doing 50,000 miles a year, I was lucky to get 3 years use out of one, frankly. So I find it hard to believe that an unlimited mileage warranty over 7 years would actually keep rebuilding the bike pretty much ad infinitum. Now, most manufacturers do charge for extended warranty, so my guess is that possibly it's not parts inclusive, but without further details, I can't tell you that for sure. Now, the other condition that's usually imposed is you have to have the bike dealer serviced. Now, although service intervals have got longer, the costs of keeping the bike serviced by a dealer, when many things that they do are perfectly doable at home, soon outruns the cost of simply replacing an inexpensive bike like the Sinnis. So call me a little bit cynical. I suspect many of the bikes will have ceased to function well before they get to the end of that 7-year period, if they do any miles at all. And I suspect that for many riders, dealer servicing is probably out of the question at the budget end of the market too. For me, the most valuable benefit from that announcement is actually the fact you get 24/7 breakdown cover for the first year of registration. Now, a second story that involves motorcycle bits and pieces is from the Bennett's social page. And generally, I find Bennett Social pretty good information, but I have to say that I was slightly questionable when it came to these adjustable spanners. Now, quote, it says, these things are absolute witchcraft. Every size from 7mm to 19mm and 1/4 to 3/4 inch in 4 small self-adjusting spanners. They even behave as ratcheting spanners due to the way they grip and then release the nut. Now, I was naturally fairly skeptical and couldn't help notice that somebody else had already said, I always feel adjustable spanners are a bodger's tool, and that pretty much sums up my own feelings on the matter. Yeah, I'd kind of use them on a whacking great nut on a pipe or something, but for motorcycles, I'd prefer to use the proper tool. Now, the author actually said in response to that comment, they aren't. They automatically self-set to a perfect fit on any size head and grip without any chance of slipping. The more torque you apply, the tighter they fit and the better they grip. They literally fit better than a regular spanner. Well, okay, 2 questions here. If they adapt to any size head, why do you need metric and imperial? Surely they'll just adapt to whatever you put in it, unless there's some mechanism inside that makes all the difference. I don't know. The second thing I'd say, though, is that have a close look. You're only gripping 4 sides of the nut instead of the 6 faces of the nut. Now, I always use ring spanners whenever possible, or a socket, of course, because you can get drive not on the corners of the nut, but actually on the faces themselves. And by experience, I found that a ring spanner over an open-ended spanner of any sort, whether it's a ratchet, self-adjusting ratchet like this or anything else, ring spanners always reduce the less of damage to the bolt or the nut that you're trying to undo. Now, the other problem is that look at the size of the jaws of those adjustables. They're much larger than an equivalent ring spanner. And you're going to find very few locations on a motorcycle. About the only one I can actually think of is the rear wheel spindle, where you can get a big adjustable on it. Because everywhere else you've got tight space. So I'm not entirely sure about that. What about doing things up again? Well, the other factor is that the length of the handle. It's a rule of thumb that the length of a spanner gets shorter as the nuts and bolts get smaller, simply to avoid putting too much torque onto the bolt, with the possibility of first over tightening and B, stripping the thread out. Now, okay, you do get excuse me, different handle lengths on these wrenches. But yeah, you'll still have quite a lot of leverage on the smallest nuts. So do they offer convenience? Well, if you take just the 2 metric wrenches, then what would you need in terms of spanners for a bike? Well, you need 8, 10, 12, probably a 13, plus a 14 and a 17 on a typical bike. And you may need a 19, a 22 or a 24 to do up wheel spindles, possibly a bigger than standard nut. So they're nice looking. If you're putting together a comprehensive toolkit for the workshop, you may find a use for them, but I'm struggling to see it, frankly. But they will lighten the wallet. This 4-pack of adjustable wrenches is around £150 in the shops. Now, a high quality Facom combination spanner, it's not a well-known brand, but they are very good quality make, and they do make up many of the tools in my toolbox. 17mm spanner will set you back a tenner. So do the sums. If you need 8 different spanners at a tenner, that's £80. That's half the price, and they won't take up a lot more space in your toolbox. Right, okay, so that's the spanners. So today's discussion point, just a quick one. The EU's plan for decarbonisation of road traffic by banning new vehicles from being sold with internal combustion engines is beginning to run into some more organised opposition. Now, it's being reported in new news, but actually it was last year in June that the finance minister, Christian Lindner, stated that Germany's government will not agree to European Union plans to effectively ban the sale of new cars with internal combustion engines from 2035. And he said there would continue to be niches for combustion engines, so a ban was wrong and the government would not agree to this European legislation. So that was Germany. Now, earlier this month, EU member states voted to delay formal approval of legislation that would effectively prohibit ICE engines in new vehicles. So Germany, Italy, Poland and Bulgaria, they could block the the adopting of this amended regulation by preventing the qualified majority necessary for that to go through. And one of the things that they cite is a loss of innovation. They cite the more expensive cars, and they also say it would cause the decline of a core European industry. And Austria and Italy are also said to be opposing forced electrification due to a lack of technology. Naturally, of course, the proponents of the ICE ban argue that championing the internal combustion engine will actually benefit the US and China, who are threatening to overtake Europe with massive investments in electric cars and batteries. So that argument will rumble on, I'm sure. There are pros and cons in both directions. Now, as it happens, the Motorcycle Action Group have met with the government here in the UK, and they argue also similarly that the UK should ban it or should rethink its plan to ban the sale of new ICE engines. Now, MAG argue that the ICE will be, quote, necessary and desirable for the foreseeable future. And that, quote, net zero can be achieved whilst this technology continues to supply the clear benefits of carbon neutral, energy dense liquid fuels. Now, so in other words, MAG seem to believe that fossil fuels can be replaced with synthetic fuels and biofuels. Now, I personally, if you ask me, I think that a shift to fully electric EVs by 2030 or 2035 is somewhat unlikely. We're only 7 years away, and I really don't think that we'll be able to do it. But the problem is, how do we fuel alternatives? Now, I've talked about in previous shows that supposedly clean hydrogen is actually being sourced from coal and oil, and it simply shifts the pollution problem sideways. It basically to wherever the source material is being processed. And in the case of Japan, for example, who are investing heavily in hydrogen technology, it's Australia who is supplying them that hydrogen. And as for the genuinely sustainable e-fuels, which are only made from biomass or from actually completely synthesizing fuel, it doesn't look as if anything other than relatively small quantities is ever going to be possible. And it will be at considerable extra cost by the look of things. So it's no coincidence, perhaps, that several of the premium automotive makers are looking into synthetic fuels. But mainstream use, I really don't think so. The amount of biomass you would require to feed the world and their cars and trucks is absolutely enormous. And it would require huge solar power plants to create synthetic fuel. And you've still got to transport that fuel, of course, where it's needed. So there's always a risk that you put the power of the fuel into the hands of a limited number of governments, which is pretty much what's happened with petrol. In any case, even if the fuel that goes in is carbon neutral when it comes out again, it doesn't solve one of the biggest problems of city centre pollution, and that is the NOx pollutants, which cause a lot of harm to the people breathing it. And that happens where the fuel is burned, regardless of whether the fuel is carbon neutral. So yes, we may be tackling the greenhouse gases, but we're still producing NOx in cities. How we get around that conundrum, I don't know. Wiser people than me hopefully will have an idea about that at some point in the future. Right, that's it for today. As I said earlier, I will come back to the item on the visit to the MotoCap laboratory with Associate Professor Chris Hurren, and me dropping in to see how he works on things. Right, so just a couple of comments. Kevin says, many tourists treat scooter rentals like fairground rides. I wouldn't disagree with that. And he also says, read the ban on ICE sales. The UK lacks infrastructure and government arguably now lacks funds for the same. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the commitment to putting in, say, 3,000 charging points by 2030, which I believe is one of the government commitments, is laughably inadequate. They're clearly hoping the private sector will take up the slack there. All right. Okay. So thank you very much indeed if you have looked in, well, Kevin's looked in live, as I say. If you are watching this on catch up, many apologies for the glitches yesterday, and hopefully Wednesday we will be back to normal. So how do I turn the stream off now? As I say, using different streaming software today, so it's all a bit of a learning curve for me. Anyway, so from me, Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, thanks for tuning into 11s, and hopefully see